She showed up in sneakers with a confirmed reservation. They turned her away without a second glance. Less than 24 hours later, she walked back in, as the new owner of the entire hotel. Sabria Varnell stood outside the Belridge Regent Hotel in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, glancing at her phone one last time. The booking was confirmed. She'd done it the same way she always did, under her assistant's name. It wasn't about secrecy. It was just cleaner that way. Less attention, fewer questions. Her driver pulled away, and for a moment she stood still, taking in the grand facade of the hotel. It wasn't the tallest building on the block, but it was trying to be important. Polished limestone, a glossy awning with gold trim, double doors guarded by men in matching navy blazers. It looked like a place that cared more about being seen than being welcoming. Sabria adjusted the strap on her carry-on, nodded politely to the doorman, and stepped inside. The lobby was curated. White marble floors, oversized crystal chandelier, stale perfume piped through the vents. A young couple sat by the gas fireplace, sipping something bright in coupe glasses. A woman with sleek hair clicked across the floor in red heels. All of it felt performative, but Sabria had seen worse. She approached the front desk and gave a short smile. "Reservation under Amina Travers?" The young woman behind the desk didn't look up right away. She was busy typing something, possibly nothing. Her name tag read, Callie. Blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, a bright scarlet scarf knotted at the throat. When she finally made eye contact, it was the kind of look that weighs you. "One moment," Callie said, then tapped at the keyboard with deliberate slowness. Sabria waited. She wasn't in a rush. She'd been in too many rooms where patience was her only shield. Callie squinted at the screen, then tilted her head just slightly. "I'm sorry, I don't have any reservation under that name. Are you sure it was for tonight?" Sabria showed her the confirmation email. Callie barely glanced at the screen. "Right. Okay. Strange. We're actually at full capacity, so I'm afraid I can't offer you a room tonight. There's a courtyard about 15 minutes out." Sabria looked at her. Not angry, just measuring the moment. "Could you double-check the name? I've checked everything," Callie replied flatly, then plastered on a customer service smile. "Sorry." Behind her, a bellhop rolled a cart across the marble. The couple by the fireplace stood up and walked toward the desk. Callie's tone shifted instantly. "Welcome to the Belridge Regent," she beamed. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Devon Marks," the man replied. Without hesitation, Callie found the name, grabbed 2 keys, and handed them over with a chirpy, "Enjoy your stay." Sabria didn't say anything. She already knew. She stepped back, letting another guest cut in line behind her. The cold fluorescent light glinted off the acrylic sign on the desk. 5-star excellence with southern charm. She turned and walked out. No scene, no protest. She wasn't going to waste energy on people who treated respect like it was optional. She'd been here before, not this exact lobby, but this exact moment. And each time, it did the same thing. It reminded her why she worked the way she did. Quietly, relentlessly, without needing to be accepted to be effective. Outside, the evening was cooling off. A breeze lifted the hem of her travel jacket. She pulled out her phone, tapped her assistant's name, and called. "They shut me out," she said simply. There was a pause on the other end. "You want me to push the meeting?" Sabria looked up at the facade again. The lighting, the doorman, the pretty little hotel that didn't see her. "No," she said. "I'll be back in the morning." But that night wasn't over. And what happened next would shift more than just hotel keys. Sabria walked down 5th Avenue toward the corner of 20th Street, her rolling carry-on bumping over cracked sidewalks. The city felt different in the evening. Fewer honking cars, more people walking with purpose. She wasn't angry, just dialed in. She'd learned how to compartmentalize things like this years ago. If she let every slight cut her open, she'd never have built a life, much less a company. She stopped at the modest storefront of the Harwood Inn, a 3-story family-run hotel she remembered from her early days in Birmingham. It wasn't flashy, but the reviews were solid, the owners kind, and the beds clean. She rang the bell and within seconds as there. An older man with thick glasses and a sweater vest opened the door. "Evening, ma'am," he said warmly. "Room for one?" "You're in luck," he grinned, motioning her inside. "Last one just opened up." Sabria exhaled for the first time in an hour. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. The walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings, local sports heroes, community events, a photo of the owner's grandfather cutting the ribbon on opening day in 1963. No pretense. Just people. As she signed the check-in form, her phone buzzed with a new message from her assistant, Amina. "Got confirmation. Belridge sale clears by 9 a.m. tomorrow. You want a car ready?" Sabria smirked slightly. The timing was poetic. She typed, "Yes, and call Brandon. I want the transition files ready." She slid the phone into her pocket and headed up the narrow staircase to her room. The key wasn't digital. It was metal. Solid. Real. Inside, the space was small but cozy. A single queen bed, beige walls, a wooden writing desk that creaked when she touched it. She sat on the edge of the mattress, pulled off her sneakers, and ran her fingers through her braids. She didn't feel tired. Not yet. Her mind was already moving ahead. She opened her laptop and pulled up the transition binder. The Belridge Regent had been a hot property once. 10 years ago, it had been the pride of the financial district. But between mismanagement, inflated luxury packages, and a PR scandal involving a city councilman and a bathtub full of champagne, it was hanging on by a thread. That's where Holden Finch Partners came in. Sabria specialized in these kinds of takeovers. Distressed hotels, broken trust, public reputations patched up by expensive branding agencies. She didn't come in with promises, she came in with plans. And she never needed applause. She scrolled through the staff list. General Manager, Hugh Dobson. Been there 6 years. Outdated hiring practices, below-average guest satisfaction scores, 3 pending HR complaints, swept under the rug. She flagged that page. The receptionist's name jumped out next. Callie Brenner. Hired 2 years ago. Internally promoted. No formal complaints, but a pattern in guest feedback. Cold, selective, inconsistent. Sabria leaned back in her chair. These weren't just numbers. These were signs. She opened a different tab. The investment report her team had prepped. The acquisition was already scheduled to be public by the end of the week. She had the leverage, the papers were signed. All that was left was the walkthrough. And the front desk. She closed the laptop and lay back on the bed. The air conditioner hummed against the window pane. She stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the past replay. Not just today, but years of small moments that built up like sediment. Boardroom stares, assumptions, conversations that ended as soon as she entered the room. And through it all, she never stopped building. She remembered her first client, a worn-out motel in Tupelo, Mississippi. The owner didn't believe she could turn it around. Said she was too young, too different. 2 years later, he offered her 30% of the company. She turned it down. Respect earned through grit had always meant more than forced invitations. There was a knock at the door. The hotel manager from downstairs brought her a cup of tea. "Something warm," he said, smiling. "You looked like today was heavy." Sabria nodded. "You could say that." He started to leave, then paused. "Whatever it was, it won't follow you here. You're welcome, truly." She thanked him and took the tea, closing the door gently. That one act, that kindness, settled deeper than Callie's smug dismissal ever did. But Sabria wasn't done. Tomorrow she'd return, not for a key, but for the entire building. Sabria let the tea cool in her hands before taking a sip. The chamomile was slightly too sweet, but she didn't mind. Her body had started to slow, but her brain was still scanning. Always planning. Always lining up the next move. Some people worked to climb. Sabria worked to secure ground no one could take. Her phone buzzed again. Amina, loyal as ever, had sent a follow-up message. "Hugh Dobson knows we're taking over. He's asking to meet with you directly." She replied quickly. "Tell him 10 a.m. in the executive lounge. No earlier, no later." She set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling again. this time letting her mind drift. Birmingham had never been home, but it had shaped her. She came here at 22 with nothing but a business plan in her backpack and a used Honda Civic with a dented bumper. She remembered her first office, a converted storage closet in a strip mall. The carpet had cigarette burns, and the windows didn't open. But it was hers. That was all that mattered. She worked 16-hour days for clients who didn't believe in her until the numbers started turning green. They didn't care who she was, only that she could fix what they broke. Her first major deal had nearly unraveled over a handshake. A man named Reginald Towler, 40 years older and twice as loud, tried to bury her in paperwork and arrogance. He told her to go back to consulting. She told him to read the clause on page 92. By the time he found it, she'd already filed the closing documents with the state. That became her rhythm. Move fast, speak less, win quietly. She took another sip of tea. The air in the room felt heavier now, not in a bad way, just honest. Her thoughts moved to her parents. Her mother, Bernetta, was a former librarian who believed in rules and silence. Her father, Louis, used to fix cars in the back of their house in Dothan. Both taught her that hard work doesn't guarantee respect, but it gives you options. And when the world tries to lock you out, owning the building changes everything. That was what Belridge represented. Not revenge, control. She wasn't looking to make Callie uncomfortable. That woman didn't even matter, not in the grand scope. But she was going to shift the culture that allowed someone like her to decide who got to feel welcome. It was never just about rooms. It was about power, and who felt entitled to wield it. The kettle on the desk clicked off. She hadn't even realized she'd turned it on. It was past midnight, but she was too wired to sleep. She pulled the throw blanket over her legs and opened her laptop again. A note caught her eye, something she'd written in the margins weeks ago during due diligence. This hotel is a perfect example of image over infrastructure. Looks expensive, runs cheap. Opportunity lies beneath the gold trim, she smiled to herself. Belridge didn't need another rebrand. It needed a reset. Sabria believed in building businesses that ran on character, not illusion. That's what had earned her trust in rooms where people like her were rarely invited. She was a disruptor, sure, but she didn't chase attention. She corrected systems, and then she moved on. She clicked through photos of the hotel's current staff. She paused when she saw a custodian named Lewis Pratt. 58 years old, 25 years at Belridge, no complaints, 5 service commendations. His file had been buried near the bottom. Classic. She flagged it for follow-up. Then her eyes landed on the training manual from 2017. Outdated. Tone-deaf in places. No DEI language, no cultural sensitivity training, no accountability measures. It read like it was written by someone who had never had to sit on the other side of a front desk with a sinking feeling in their chest. Sabria made a new folder. Respect before recognition. She didn't know exactly what the Saint-Thomercian would look like, but she knew what it wouldn't tolerate. Her head finally started to nod as the hours stretched thin. She slid her laptop shut, set it beside the bed, and exhaled. Just before the light went out, she whispered to herself, "You've got the keys now. Let's see who's ready for the door." But morning wasn't just about business, it was about setting the tone, and who would follow it. Morning light poured through the old cotton curtains of the Harwood Inn. Sabria woke to the muffled sound of cars passing and someone dragging a hose outside. She wasn't the type to sleep in. Never had been. Even as a kid, she'd wake before her parents, make herself cereal, and watch them get ready for their early shifts. Routine had always given her peace. She sat up, brushed her palms over her face, and reached for her phone. Amina had already sent the morning brief. Hugh Dobson confirmed for 10 a.m. Legal team was arriving at 9:30. The transition packet had been prepped, printed, and was now waiting for Sabria in the trunk of the town car downstairs. But before she got moving, she let herself sit still. Her success hadn't happened overnight, and nothing about it had been clean. She remembered the day she almost quit. 10 years ago, standing on the sidewalk in downtown Mobile with a manila envelope in one hand and an eviction notice in the other. Her second office had folded under a developer's dirty loan deal. She'd taken the fall. The money was gone. Staff had walked. The investors disappeared faster than they came. All she had left was the knowledge of how systems worked and how to pull them apart. She'd called her father that night. She didn't cry, but he could hear it in her voice. He told her, "Baby girl, if they can take it from you, it wasn't really yours. But if you build it again, they'll never touch it." That was the day she started Holden Finch Partners. No outside capital, no partnerships, just a laptop, a folding table, and the list of every mistake she swore she'd never repeat. She named the company after two people most had never heard of. Holden was her uncle, a jazz musician who died without fanfare but never stopped teaching young musicians how to own their music. Finch was a nod to Mrs. Gloria Finch, the woman who ran the neighborhood bookshop where Sabria studied in high school, the first person who told her she could be in charge, not just involved. The firm grew slowly, methodically, one acquisition at a time. She avoided loud investors, turned down flashy offers, and built a reputation for cutting through hype and making places work. By year 4, she had turned over 9 properties. All profitable, all running clean. By year 6, city councils were calling her. But what made her different wasn't the numbers. It was the way she moved. No fanfare, no panels, no interviews in glossy magazines. She didn't want to be the face of anything. She wanted ownership that didn't require performance, and she always kept receipts, not just paper trails, but moments, like the time she walked into a meeting in Baton Rouge where 3 developers asked if she was here to cater, or the time a lawyer reviewed her contract, looked her up and down, and asked if she was sure she wanted to take on that much risk. She remembered each one. She kept them like matches in a box. She never lit them. But she remembered. The Belridge Regent was just another piece of the puzzle. It wasn't personal, not until Callie made it that way. Not until she saw the way the woman's smile switched off the moment she read Sabria's face instead of the reservation email. Still, Sabria wasn't after revenge. She was after alignment. Her plan for Belridge was already sketched out. Streamline operations, revise onboarding protocols, rebrand from the inside out, retain staff who had real commitment, and restructure the roles where attitude outweighed experience. And the tone for that started today. She closed her eyes briefly, then stood and started getting ready. A charcoal suit, simple silver studs, clean white blouse, flat shoes. No makeup, just gloss. She pulled her braids back into a low knot. Before heading out, she slipped the room key onto the dresser and left a note beside it. "Thank you for treating me like someone." Downstairs, the Harwood Inn manager waved from behind the desk. "You heading back out there?" She smiled. "Yep, got a morning meeting." "Hope they know who they're about to sit across from." She didn't say anything, just gave a soft shrug and opened the front door. But walking back into Belridge wasn't about being seen. It was about what happened when the doors finally closed. The Belridge Regent looked no different that morning, still draped in its polished exterior, still trying to sell luxury with every corner of its lobby. But inside, it was already someone else's. Sabria's car pulled up at exactly 9:45 a.m. The driver opened the door, and she stepped out holding nothing but a slim leather folder under her arm. No rolling bag this time, no checking in. She wasn't there as a guest. Inside, a young man in a dark grey suit waited just past the revolving door. "Miss Varnell," he said, offering a slight nod. "I'm Quentin from legal. Your team's already in the lounge." "Thank you," she replied. The same doorman from the night before held the door for her again, but this time he met her eyes longer. She saw the recognition flicker behind them. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They passed the front desk. Callie was there. She didn't look up at first. She was tapping on a screen, half listening to someone on the phone. Then her eyes caught Sabria. For a split second, her face froze. Not fear, not guilt, just the kind of confusion that comes when your assumptions start to collapse. Sabria kept walking. The executive lounge was on the mezzanine level. Glass doors, velvet chairs, and a tray of untouched muffins no one wanted. Her team sat around the long oak table. Amina, Quentin, 2 associates from operations, and a transition officer from the bank overseeing the final step of the deal. They all stood when she entered. She motioned them to sit. "Anything I need to see before we sign?" she asked. Quentin slid the paperwork across the table. "The last lien cleared. Dobson's approval is signed, and the bank has issued the transition letter. Once you put ink on this, Belridge is officially under Holden Finch." Sabria picked up the pen and read over the summary page one last time. She wasn't looking for errors. She was anchoring the moment. "Proceed," she said. She signed. 5 copies. Each name, neat and deliberate. With each stroke, the old chapter of Belridge folded in on itself. The building was no longer run by the people who mistook image for integrity. It now belonged to someone who saw past the gold trim and right into the cracks behind it. Quentin collected the papers. "You want Dobson brought in?" 10 o'clock, she said, checking her watch. "Let him wait 1 more minute." The room fell silent for a moment. Everyone looked at her, not with awe, but with clarity. They knew how she worked. Precision, not performance. When Sabria moved, there was a reason. Finally, she stood and walked to the window. The view overlooked the valet stand, where hotel staff moved cars without ever knowing what was happening above them. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt focused. At 10:01, the doors opened and Hugh Dobson walked in. Mid-50s. Round face, slightly flushed. A golf tan and cufflinks that were trying too hard. He wore the look of a man used to being in charge, and not quite ready to be the one answering questions. "Miss Varnell," he said, shaking her hand stiffly. "I understand congratulations are in order." She returned the handshake with just enough pressure to remind him it wasn't a courtesy. "That depends on how the next 2 weeks go." He gave a dry chuckle, like they were about to talk strategy over lunch. "I'll make sure the transition is smooth. Of course, my staff will cooperate fully." "That's not optional," she replied. "Let's sit." They reviewed the immediate changes. Departmental audits, a full review of all active HR files, a restructuring of shift management and guest services. Sabria outlined each step with firm, direct language. No threats, no performative generosity. Just clear expectations. Dobson pushed back once. On the review of internal complaints. "I don't think it's necessary to dig through old noise," he said. "It'll demoralize staff." Sabria looked him in the eye. "What demoralizes staff is knowing nothing ever changes. The review stays." He didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting. At 10:43, she stood. Meeting over. The rest of the team would stay behind to begin onboarding protocols. Sabria walked out of the lounge alone, heels sent on the carpeted floor. Downstairs, Callie was no longer at the front desk. A different receptionist, young, nervous, looked up as Sabria passed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to restructure what had never been questioned. But just because the ink was dry didn't mean the real work was done, and the next part would be face-to-face. Sabria made her way through the main corridor of the Belridge Regent, this time not as a guest, not as a deal closer, but as the woman now responsible for every thread of the place. She took slow, deliberate steps, absorbing the space with fresh eyes. Not the surface stuff, not the chandeliers or the floral arrangements, but the bones. She knew buildings the way some people knew faces. Every creak, every echo meant something. Amina followed behind her with a tablet in hand, quietly checking off items as they moved from room to room. The hallways were well kept but stale, neutral tones, generic artwork. It had the charm of an airport lounge, too polished to feel real. "Lobby's being run on a 9-year-old operations system," Amina said softly. "We'll need to move fast if you want check-in times below 5 minutes." "We will," Sabria replied. "But I want the people right first. Tech can wait." She turned into the staff corridor. A porter paused as she passed, eyes wide. He didn't know who she was, not yet, but he could tell she wasn't just passing through. Her energy didn't match the usual suits who walked the building. "Good morning," she said to him. He hesitated, then nodded. "Morning, ma'am." "Been working here long?" 5 years. Name? Terence. Terence Leal. You like it here? Terence thought for a second. It's a job. Pays on time. Sabria smiled slightly. That was a truth she'd heard before. You'll be seeing some changes soon. If something's been broken a while, start writing it down. Starting Monday, I'll be reading every note. His posture shifted. Yes, ma'am. She continued down the corridor, making mental notes. Some walls had minor scuffs. Ceiling tiles in one hallway were mismatched. The staff lounge smelled like microwaved cheese and sweat. Tired and ignored. She walked into the kitchen unannounced. Cooks were prepping lunch trays. A young sous chef dropped his spoon when he saw her. One of the older cooks called out, "Y'all, new ownership just walked in." Sabria gave a single nod. Just looking. A minute later, the head chef, Rosario Elman, emerged from the walk-in fridge. Late 50s, short sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a scowl that probably never left. He looked at her like she was just another executive about to lecture him on food cost. "You're the new boss?" he asked. "I am." He crossed his arms. "You ever work a kitchen?" "No, but I've worked places where no one expected much and still managed to rebuild the walls." That made Rosario pause. Then his scowl relaxed, just slightly. "Well," he muttered, "if you're here to fix what needs fixing, then welcome. But if it's just surface polish, we've seen that before." Sabria looked around the room. "I don't do polish. I do people." She left the kitchen and headed back toward the central elevator, pausing near the laundry unit. The hallway there was warmer, loud with machines spinning. A thin woman stepped out from a side door, carrying a bin of towels. She stopped short when she saw Sabria, almost bumping the cart into the wall. "Excuse me," the woman said, breathless. "Didn't see you there." "No problem," Sabria said. "You work laundry?" 20 years. The woman replied with a hint of pride. "My name's Minda." Sabria nodded, then offered her hand. "Starting next week, Minda, you'll have a new schedule rotation, updated equipment, and, if I have my way, a raise. You've earned more than 2 decades of being invisible." Minda blinked. "You really own the hotel now?" "I do." Minda looked like she wanted to ask more, but just gave a small shake of her head and said, "Well, thank you, Ms. Varnell." Minda's smile was genuine. "Thank you, Ms. Varnell." Sabria stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. As the doors closed, she saw Callie reappear at the front desk. Their eyes met just before the metal slid shut. There was no malice in her face. No arrogance, either. Just a calm certainty. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone. She was here to hold the door open, for the people who never got to stand in the lobby with both feet on equal ground. But before the culture could shift, there had to be a reckoning, and Sabria was done postponing it. The meeting room on the executive floor overlooked the city skyline, secured glass panes, a long polished table, and a coffee station no one had touched. Sabria sat at the head, her posture still, her eyes scanning the agenda in front of her. This wasn't a performance. It was precision. At exactly 1:00 p.m., Hugh Dobson walked in with the head of HR, a quiet man in an ill-fitting blazer named Ron Felder. Amina sat to Sabria's right, tablet ready. Sabria didn't wait for greetings. "We're reviewing staff culture today," she said. "Specifically, what's allowed to happen without accountability." Dobson cleared his throat. "I've already informed Ron to bring our onboarding documents. We can show you exactly how we—" "I've read them," she interrupted. "Outdated. Surface level. No measurable systems in place for bias tracking or behavior corrections." Ron opened his mouth, but Sabria held up a hand. "I'm not here to pick apart paperwork. I'm here because people like Callie are the face of this hotel, and right now, that face reflects exclusion." Dobson shifted in his chair. "With all due respect, Ms. Varnell, we've had extremely high guest satisfaction scores with certain guests," Sabria said calmly. "I watched a couple walk in after me last night and receive full service while I was told the hotel was full. With my booking in hand." The room fell silent. Ron looked at Dobson, who said nothing. "I don't need an apology," Sabria continued. "I need change, real change. She slid a folder across the table toward Ron. Inside were highlighted complaint logs, each marked by irregularities, inconsistencies in service, ignored requests, and language that hinted at dismissiveness, all under Callie's tenure. Ron flipped through the pages. His face stiffened. "I want her brought in," Sabria said plainly. "Now?" Ron asked. "Now." There was a pause. Then Ron stood and left the room. Dobson glanced at Sabria. "She's young," he offered. "Sometimes people just lack awareness." "Awareness isn't a license to gatekeep access," Sabria replied. "If she treats people like that while being watched, imagine how she acts when no one's looking." Minutes later, Callie entered. She looked nervous, a little flushed, jaw tight. Her eyes darted between the people in the room, then landed on Sabria, who remained composed. "You remember me?" Sabria asked. Callie hesitated. "From last night?" "That's right. You said the hotel was full, that you didn't have my reservation." I think there was a system error. Sometimes the software filters out third-party bookings. I booked directly through the hotel's site," Sabria said. "Under Amina Travers. Same as I've done for years." Callie glanced at Dobson, then Ron, then back at Sabria. "I didn't mean anything by it. I just followed protocol." "There was no protocol," Sabria said, her voice low. "There was a choice. And you made it in under 30 seconds. Callie's mouth tightened, but she didn't speak. Sabria didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This isn't a firing conversation. That would be too easy. This is a realignment conversation. You'll be going through training starting next week. You'll have 3 evaluations over 60 days. You'll shadow senior concierge staff. And you'll be accountable to a performance review system that measures how people feel when they interact with you." Callie blinked. "That's it? You expected worse. I thought you were going to, I don't know, humiliate me." "I don't do that," Sabria said. "I correct behavior, and I expect you to rise, or step aside." Callie's voice was small. "Why give me the chance?" "Because I want this hotel to reflect change, not just punishment." There was no gratitude in Callie's eyes. Not yet. But there was understanding. She left the room quietly. Sabria looked at Dobson and Ron. "Every front-facing staff member goes through respect before recognition. Anyone with 2 or more red flag complaints is re-evaluated for retention. Clear?" Dobson nodded. This time he didn't try to smooth things over. Ron adjusted his blazer and said, "We'll start tomorrow." Sabria stood. "One more thing," she added, walking to the door. "You don't build culture with slogans. You build it with boundaries." But policy alone wasn't enough. The next phase was making people believe in the change. The Belridge Regent's energy began to shift within a week. Not loudly, not with sweeping announcements or flashy banners, but with the kind of small changes people feel before they even realize something is different. The first thing to go was the outdated training manual. In its place, a new program, Respect Before Recognition, was quietly rolled out. Every staff member received a printed version with their name stamped on the front cover. No long-winded speeches, just one clear line on the inside of each booklet. Who someone is matters more than how someone looks. Sabria didn't hover. She didn't walk the halls waiting for people to perform. She gave instructions and expected them to be followed, but she made herself available. Every day at 3 p.m. she left her door open for 30 minutes. No appointments, no titles required. And they came. Terence from guest services was the first to knock. He sat stiffly at first, then eased into his chair when he realized she wasn't taking notes or judging his grammar. "I just wanted to say, I see what you're doing," he told her. "Feels different already." Sabria leaned back. "Different how?" "People are breathing easier. Not scared they'll get replaced, but like someone finally notices." Later that week, Minda from laundry stopped by. She didn't sit down. She just popped her head in and said, "That new folding table? First time my back's not killing me by lunch. Appreciate it." Even Rosario, the head chef, who'd said almost nothing since her walkthrough, nodded at her during lunch one afternoon and said, "Supplies came in on time today. That's a first." Word spread quickly, not about what Sabria said, but how she moved. Quiet decisions, real improvements, A new code where professionalism didn't mean performance for performance's sake. And people began rising to meet that. The front desk transformed too. Callie was back, but not as the solo gatekeeper she once was. Now she worked alongside a mentor, a woman named Phuong Tran, who had worked luxury hotels in San Francisco, Austin, and New Orleans before relocating to Birmingham to care for her father. Phuong had presence, poise, and zero tolerance for passive arrogance. Their first session together was rocky. Callie stumbled over phrasing, hesitated when guests who didn't fit the brand approached, and defaulted to polite detachment. But Phuong never embarrassed her. She just asked, "Would you speak that way if your job depended on it?" Callie learned. Over time, her tone shifted. She started catching herself, listening more, smiling without calculation. One afternoon, Sabria stood at a distance behind a column in the lobby and watched as a man in overalls and worn boots walked in holding a small suitcase. He looked around, uncertain. Callie approached. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Belridge. Do you have a reservation, or would you like help finding a room?" No trace of the old voice, just hospitality. Sabria didn't say anything. She just walked away quietly, heading back to the elevator. Meanwhile, the hotel began drawing a different kind of attention. Local organizations started reaching out about hosting events. A non-profit booked the ballroom for a career day targeting underserved high school seniors. A local poetry group asked to host weekly readings on the rooftop. Things that would have been denied under Dobson's reign started flowing through without resistance. Even internally, the culture shifted. The break room was repainted. Staff could now submit anonymous ideas through an open suggestion portal. Several employees pitched a welcome board, rotating photos and bios of long-time staff, to be displayed behind the reception area. Sabria approved it. And when the first board went up, Minda's photo was front and center. One of the doormen pulled out his phone and took a picture of it, grinning to himself. The old Belridge had been about image. The new Belridge was about identity. Sabria never made speeches. She didn't hold town halls or bring in motivational speakers. Her rule was simple: your work speaks for you, but your respect walks ahead. By the second week, even the guests felt the difference. "I don't know what it is," one woman said at checkout, "but this place feels fairer." Sabria's desk was quiet when she heard that. She didn't even look up, just smiled to herself and kept reading. But the true test wasn't inside the hotel. It was what the outside world would say when it came back through those doors. 3 weeks after Sabria took ownership, the Belridge Regent hosted its first community event under the new management, a scholarship fundraiser for local students entering hospitality, culinary, and business programs. The idea came from Amina, but Sabria funded it herself, quietly, without press or social media buzz. Just a handwritten invitation sent to schools, small business owners, and families who'd never stepped foot in the building before. The ballroom, once reserved for high-end weddings and corporate galas, looked different that night. Not cheaper, just more human. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling, the white tablecloths were folded neatly, and the staff wore crisp uniforms with new name tags that actually showed their full names, not just initials. Minda was at the door, greeting guests as they arrived. She'd volunteered. Said she wanted to see what the place looked like when the lights were pointed at the people, not just the chandeliers. Sabria stood off to the side, watching with her arms crossed. She wasn't the center of attention. She didn't need to be. She was watching it all unfold. The kids in thrift store suits trying not to fidget, the parents holding hands tighter than they needed to, the janitor from a nearby high school sitting at a table next to a banker without anyone pretending they didn't belong. At one point, Terence found her by the buffet table. "You see the mayor's here?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "I saw." "He's shaking hands like he did something," Sabria smirked. "Let him shake. This isn't his event." She didn't give speeches often, but near the end of the night, someone handed her a mic. It wasn't planned, but there was a gentle pressure in the air. People wanted to know who she was, not the CEO, not the owner, the person. She walked to the small stage in her flats and charcoal dress. No podium, just the mic in her hand. I'm not much for spotlights, she started. So I'll keep this brief. I bought this hotel not because it was beautiful, but because it forgot how to treat people like they were. The room was silent, listening closely. I grew up in Dothan. My parents were the kind who worked so hard, they'd fall asleep at the table. I didn't come from luxury. I came from work. And the longer I spent in this industry, the more I realized that the people who run the places are rarely the ones respected in them. She scanned the crowd. The kitchen staff had stepped out into the hallway to listen. One of the high school students held a pen, scribbling in a notebook. So I wanted to create something different here, a place where the people who clean the floors, prep the food, handle the check-ins, don't just feel useful, they feel seen. She lowered the mic slightly. Her voice was calm, but it cut deep. Dignity is not earned through job titles. It's given the moment someone walks through the door. Applause started soft, then grew. But she didn't linger. She walked off the stage and handed the mic back without waiting for more. Later, as the room began to thin out, a young woman approached her. Barely 21, she wore a grey sweater dress and boots too big for her ankles. She introduced herself with a shy voice. Ms. Varnell, I'm Meisha. I'm one of the scholarship recipients. I just wanted to say thank you. Sabria smiled. What program? Hospitality. But I want to own, not just manage. That got Sabria's full attention. Meisha continued. I grew up right around the corner, past this hotel my whole life. I always thought it was for people who looked different than me. Sabria nodded slowly. So did I. Meisha hesitated, then asked, Do you think you'd ever mentor someone like me? Without pause, Sabria said, I already am. They exchanged contact info. Nothing flashy, just two people with history in their eyes and future in their hands. That night, as Sabria stood in the now empty ballroom, the staff cleaning up around her, she ran her fingers along the edge of one of the tables. She remembered when she wasn't allowed in these kinds of rooms. Not really, not unless she was working them. Now she was building them, but lessons don't last unless they're passed on, and Sabria had one final message to give. The next morning, Belridge Regent was quiet again. Guests checked out with their coffees in hand, bellhops loaded luggage with casual rhythm, and the kitchen clattered in the distance as staff prepped for brunch service. But something was different. There was no event today, no big meeting. Still, the energy lingered. A calm kind of pride, like everyone knew they were building something that finally made sense. Sabria sat alone in her office with the blinds open, letting the natural light spill in across her desk. She wasn't reading emails, she wasn't reviewing numbers. She was reflecting, letting the stillness confirm what she already knew. This place, this building that had once rejected her with a smile, had changed. Not just because she owned it, but because she led it with intention. The front desk now welcomed guests of all types with equal warmth. The break room had laughter again. Employees lingered a little longer after clocking out, not because they had to, but because they didn't dread being here. That's what culture is. It's not policies in a binder or posters on a wall. It's the feeling people carry with them when no one's watching. Sabria picked up her pen and started writing a note, one she'd post on the staff board later that day. To the Belridge team, this place used to shine on the outside while staying hollow on the inside. But now, it breathes. That's because of you. Keep making people feel like they belong here. Not just because it's their job, but because it's their space too. You matter. You're seen. You're not temporary. SV. She pinned it up just before lunch. Minda was the first to notice them. She read it aloud to one of the new hires, a 19-year-old named Daryl, who was still getting used to folding linen on time. You hear that? Minda said, tapping the note with her knuckle. That right there is how you know you're working for somebody who gets it. Downstairs, Callie had just finished checking in a middle-aged couple with no luggage and slightly wrinkled clothes. She didn't flinch. She didn't second-guess their presence. She handed them a key, gave them directions to the elevator, and ended with a genuine, "We're glad to have you here." As the couple walked off, she caught a glimpse of Sabria standing near the corner, pretending to study a guest satisfaction report. Their eyes met. Callie gave a small nod. Not just one of recognition, one of respect. of accountability. Sabria returned it with something softer. Not a grin, just approval. Quiet, earned, and real. Later that afternoon, she met with Maisha in the rooftop cafe. The girl brought a binder full of notes and color-coded tabs. Her hands trembled slightly when she pulled out a list of questions. "You don't have to get everything right at once," Sabria told her gently. I don't want to mess this up." "You won't. If you lead with clarity, and you stay honest, people follow that." Maisha exhaled, leaned back, and whispered, "Thank you. I never thought I'd even be allowed in a place like this." Sabria sipped her tea before replying. "I wasn't either. I had to make space." Maisha looked confused. "Make space?" "Yeah," Sabria said, setting down her cup. "You don't wait for people to open the door. You buy the building, change the locks, and decide who gets welcomed next." That sentence landed hard. Maisha blinked slowly, then nodded. The lesson clicked. Not about power, but responsibility. Not about revenge, but repair. As they stood to leave, Sabria turned and looked out at the city. Not as a conqueror, but as someone who'd survived it, rebuilt in it, and finally shifted its direction just enough to matter. The hotel didn't stand taller now. It stood truer. She walked back to her office, calm, unhurried. Her work here wasn't done, but it had already made its point. People would talk about how the hotel changed hands, about how a woman walked in one night and returned the next morning to sign ownership papers. But the real story was in what came after, in how a building learned how to treat people better because one woman refused to accept less. And maybe that's the message we all need. You don't always get the respect you deserve when you walk in the door, but you can build the kind of place where no one else has to earn it just to exist. If this story meant something to you, share it. Talk about it. Reflect on the spaces in your life that make people feel smaller. And think about how you could do better. Subscribe if you want more stories that speak to real change, real people, and real power.